Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now this last Sunday we asked the question, how can I be more successful at sharing Jesus? In fact, we kind of asked the question, how can I be just more successful, period? And one of the things that we found is that successful people aren't afraid of rejection. And so if we would just expect rejection and be okay with ourselves even if we get rejected, then we find ourselves trying a lot more. You know, sometimes when you're doing the right thing, we kind of expect the world to reject us. But what hurts is when we're trying to do the right thing and church people and religious people reject us. Today we're going to see how Jesus handles a situation with a man by the name of Zacchaeus, and when the religious people around him reject what he's trying to do. Now, before we get into that story, let's start with these two questions. What are some sacrifices that you have seen people make in order to worship Jesus? Maybe they came from a different background, maybe their family rejected them, maybe they came from a different religion, but what are some of the sacrifices that you have seen people make in order to worship Jesus? And secondly, what stands out about their choices? In the story for today, Jesus interacts with the dreaded tax collector. And this guy is not just a regular tax collector, he is the chief tax collector. So I want you to read Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 4, and answer these questions. What are some other stories in the Gospels where Jesus interacted with wealthy people or taught about riches? And what do we learn about these stories? Here's another question about what you read. The crowds got in the way of Zacchaeus seeing Jesus. In what ways can crowds or even churches get in the way of people seeing Jesus today? You know, one of the things I love about Zacchaeus is he had a childlike enthusiasm when it came to Jesus. I mean, he was willing to climb a tree like a little kid just to get a glimpse of Jesus. What hinders us from exercising childlike faith in Jesus? And what exactly does childlike faith look like for us as adults? In these next few passages, you will read how people, some of them probably even good people, got in the way of Jesus. Read Luke chapter 19, verses 5 through 7. What barriers do religious people sometimes put up that make it difficult to engage people who need Christ? And what are some categories of people we may be inclined to think of as unreachable by God's grace? Hopefully you came to the conclusion that there is nobody that is unreachable for Jesus Christ. And the sooner we learn that, the more effective we are for His kingdom. Here's another question. What is the significance of Jesus ignoring his opposition in order to spend time with Zacchaeus? And how does Jesus set the example for us? Now, before you read these next few passages, something tells me that this story is abbreviated. You know, you get the feeling when you read this that this whole thing happened at the base of the tree that Jesus found Zacchaeus in. But it could have happened after Jesus had spent some time with Zacchaeus. The biblical author doesn't really explain how long this process took. But whether it was a short time or a long time, either way, there was a huge life change for Zacchaeus. Next, I want you to read Luke chapter 19, verses 8 through 10. Why do you think Zacchaeus thought it was imperative that he pay back the people he had extorted money from? And what does this decision express about his heart? Wow, if our hearts could only be as open to Jesus making changes in our lives as Zacchaeus' heart was. Next, we're going to read 3 verses from another book of the Bible, 2 Corinthians. But before you read those verses, I want you to remember that Paul was pretty harsh in his first letter in 1 Corinthians. And apparently, many of the people were shocked by the first letter, and they repented. They changed their lives. So read 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 8 through 11, and answer this question. In the encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus, how did Zacchaeus demonstrate some of the qualities Paul listed in this passage? When you're done answering that question, I want you to close in prayer. Ask God to help us through the rejection so we might see people say yes to Jesus as their Savior. And remember, expect rejection. Have a great rest of your small group, and we'll see you on Sunday.